If you're interested to see what I look like in real life, then check out my Instagram at Joe the Insomniac. I'd like to say a massive thank you to my friend Joey Nightmares for featuring today. He has a great narrating voice, and I strongly recommend you go and check out his channel. He's also going to be uploading a part of our collaboration in the coming weeks soon, so be on the lookout for that. I hope you're all having a great day and enjoy these stories. I love you all, and I'll speak to you all soon.
So, this happened around 8 years ago or so. My husband and I were in Bangalore, India. We were staying at a nice hotel in a very high-profile area. Lots of shopping malls, hotels, etc. We've been to a lot of countries, and by far, we've never met such unfriendly staff at any other place. I don't mean to shade Indians at all, but it's just my experience. Not even a single smile, not even from the receptionist. It's simply rude to stare. Everywhere we go, we get stared at by locals. I dress very modest, but I'm obviously not a local. But during our stay, we had kinda got used to it. One night, after a lot of shopping and walking around, we came back to the hotel. We decided to enter through the back entrance since it was near. Through the back entrance there was a huge statue of one of their gods. Next to it was a pub. It was kind of late too. We saw a lot of stuff hanging around the pub. They were off duty and clearly drunk. As usual, they stared a lot. We ignored and went to our room. After some time, my husband decided he was hungry and wanted to get something to eat. The hotel restaurant was already closed. I wasn't hungry since we had something at a coffee shop a little earlier. So, he said he would go to another hotel nearby that had a 24-hour restaurant, get food and come back to eat ASAP. I was too tired by now to accompany him, so I told him I would like to rest. He leaves and now I'm just in my undies, relaxing, watching TV. Just a few minutes after my husband left, there was a knock on the door. Now my husband had the key card. He wouldn't need to knock, plus he knocks different. I didn't answer the door. There were no peepholes to check who was on the other side, so I just lay on the bed, ignoring. Whoever it was knocked quite a lot. I decided to just ignore until my husband came back. Mostly, I was too lazy to get dressed. The knocking stopped, and a few minutes later the hotel phone rang. I answered, and there was a guy. He asked if my husband was there. I told him no. He told me he was staying in another room of this floor and thus was our neighbor. Told me he ran out of water and asked if I had water. I sensed he was trying to find a way to get me to open the door, so I told him no, I don't have water either, and hung up. A few minutes later, there was a lot more knocking. Since this was 8 years ago, I was pretty young and naive, hardly knew what to do, so just decided to ignore it. The knocking stopped, and the phone rang again. There was a woman this time. She didn't know what to say. Clearly there were people behind her telling her what to say. She was hesitating, and I heard other voices. She soon hung up. There was more knocking again for some time, but I still ignored, so it stopped. I think they gave up trying to enter my room. Sometime later my husband came back, later than expected. I told him what happened, and oh my god, he was furious. He wanted to know who was trying to get into the room, so he locked me in the room again and went downstairs and questioned the receptionist. They did not know, of course, but they did not even try to find out. They told us there was no one else staying at our floor. My husband came upstairs and knocked at every freaking door on the floor, still furious. There was one other couple in another room who had no idea what had happened. When he came back to the room, he hugged me really tight and thanked me for not opening the door that night. We changed hotels the very next day, and all we did was leave them a bad review. So whoever was trying to get into my room that night, let's not meet. I suspect it was more than one guy too.
This story happened to me back in mid or late November. A little background information before I start the story. I'm a 23-year-old female, and I live in a pretty rural area in Tennessee at the base of the Cumberland Plateau. That's the southern part of the Appalachian Plateau in the Appalachian Mountain Range, where I can't even get internet hooked up in my house, so I have to use my mobile data on my phone if I want to use the internet. Anyway, I don't really enjoy being so far out in the country. I love the outdoors, always have and always will, but I'm gonna be completely honest, I don't live next to the most modest or upstanding citizens in my area. But that really didn't bother me and my boyfriend when I purchased our home. My boyfriend and I have two very protective dogs, Roxy and Cracker Jack. We also have grown up collecting and shooting firearms, so we feel genuinely safe being at the home alone. Our house sits on 2.5 acres, and our closest neighbour is about 3 acres away on his land, so no one really bothers us and vice versa. Anyway, on to my story. It was my off day, and I was enjoying my night off from work. My boyfriend and I both work second shift, and he works as a processing technician at a local factory. He normally gets off at around 11 at night, and is home around 11:30 or midnight. But that night, my boyfriend had called me early in the shift, and told me that his third shift process tech called out, and he would have to stay over and be around at 2 or 3 in the morning. No biggie. I've had to stay in my house overnight plenty of times alone in the 2 years that I've lived here. And like I said before, I have 2 dogs, as well as several handguns in the home that I'm not afraid to use in case an intruder attempts to break in. So around midnight, I get pretty tired of trying to stay up, so I decide I'll take a 2 to 3 hour nap until my boyfriend gets home. Then I could try to spend some time with him and not be dead tired. So I get in the bed with my 2 dogs and go to sleep shortly afterward. Then around 1:30 in the morning, my bigger dog of the 2, Roxy, starts growling very deeply at the bedroom window. This wakes me up, and I tried to get her hushed or whatever because I'm thinking she's probably heard coyotes or some animal outside. She then starts barking extremely loudly, and I hear something crash and fall outside against the bushes in my bedroom window. This is kind of weird, but I'm not panicking. Now, I wake up completely, and so does my other dog, Cracker. So just as confused as I am, but not Roxy, she bolts on my bedroom door and starts scratching it, and is still going crazy while trying to get out. Then quickly, I get up out of bed and grab my revolver that's under my bedside since that's always loaded. I start heading towards the front door, following Roxy, who's there within 2 seconds. Roxy then starts acting like she's about to break down the front door while still barking and growling. Then I thought for a second, should I just open up the door and just let her get whatever is outside? Or should I look outside the window first to see if it's just an animal like a coyote or fox, so she doesn't run off in the night and chase it? I decide to look out the window because it's beside my front door. What I saw next shocked and honestly scared me. There's a man wearing a short-sleeved tank top, just standing there staring at the side of the house. He sees me but starts running away and ends up running on the road. Even though I had my dogs and a loaded handgun, I felt truly scared. I think, oh hell no. So I think for a second, should I call my boyfriend or the sheriff department? I decide to call the local sheriff department first, of course. Whenever I'm on the phone with the dispatch, I told the lady what happened, and also told her that I thought it was very weird for someone to be running away from the house and up the road into in middle-late November wearing jeans and a tank top. The dispatcher agrees with me that it's very strange, and that they would send a sheriff's deputy out to my area immediately so they can look for the guy. She then says to me, do I want a sheriff to come by my home after they look for the guy? And I said yes. I want to make a report. So then after I got off the phone with the dispatch, I called my boyfriend and told him everything that happened. He immediately left work and came straight home. Right away, he started looking all around the outside of the house for the guy that I saw, but can't find anything. We wait for nearly 2 hours to see if the sheriff's deputy was going to come by or not, and they never did. I never got to do a follow-up because my local sheriff department does not have a way to follow up with them. In the days that passed after the incident, my boyfriend thinks it was someone shady who lives a couple miles up the road from our house. Several of his co-workers who are familiar with the area and where I live said they know of a guy that lives a couple of miles out who's notorious for being a weird creeper and a thief. One of his co-workers even said, unless you have something bolted to the floor, he's going to try and take it or peeve on you during the night. I'm very grateful that I had my dogs with me that night, and that Roxy woke me up and alerted me to a possible intruder. That man should count his lucky stars that I didn't decide to let my dogs out after him, and that he decided to run away instead of breaking in, because if he made it inside my home, he would have met my dogs that are very overprotective, as well as had a bullet in his skull, before he would have even got the chance to react.
This story takes place some time ago. I was around 13 years old at the time. At the time, I was staying with my mom and older sister at my late great-grandfather's cabin in the middle of the woods. It was a dark night around mid-August, and we had been spending the summer there. Now, this cabin has always had its distinct personality. My great-grandfather had built it himself after he finished fighting the war during World War II. The interior is made up entirely of dark wood. The furniture still has that old pre-war Nordic and Eastern European feel to it. Caroline-style, hand-woven carpets line up the floors, and the walls are decorated with old, worn-out framed photographs of unknown but serious-looking relatives of my family from the past. The house has always had a somewhat mysterious, a little offsetting but still calming feel to it. My sister and I, being curious kids, had just on the previous day looked through some old photo albums belonging to our great-grandparents that we had found in the library. A decision we had both regretted. As it turns out, it was customary back in the day to photograph the dead. As you could guess, the albums dated after the war were filled with photos of dead bodies sitting, laying next to their relatives. We went through the albums and there were tons of them, from grown-up adults to little dead kids to actually babies in tiny coffins. And what made it worse was almost all the photos were taken unmistakably right in front of this cabin on the yard. We shivered and wondered if the bodies had been buried here too, but decided in that moment together we would never ask about it. I mention this photo album in detail because it's relevant for understanding why I was already feeling creeped out that night. That evening, me and my sister had decided to sit in the candlelight living room and read horror books together, because why not? We were staying in an old cabin after all, and it felt atmospherically appropriate. My mom, being a night owl and insomniac, had decided to go for a sauna and a shower in the middle of the night. The cabin's wooden sauna is located in the stone basement of the cabin. Another important detail to note is that this cabin is in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a forest. There are a handful of neighbors who all live at least a kilometer away. The whole community has lived there for generations, and everybody knows everybody, so as a rule, we never had a habit of locking the front doors when staying there. The only person that ever locked the front door to the cabin was me, and I always did it accidentally by slamming the door too hard so it automatically locked. So, it was midnight. My mom was down in the basement, and me and my sister were reading horror stories in the living room. We were in a mostly light mood, despite both of us feeling a bit creeped out, when suddenly, out of nowhere, we hear a faint knock on the door. We both jump up. We barely ever had visitors during the day, and nobody has ever showed up unannounced during the night to this place. We decide in that moment we were probably mistaken and feeling spooked by the stories, and it must be the wind that was making the noise. But no, the faint, calm knocking came again, then louder knocking followed. We realized that undeniably there had to be somebody out there, and that they wanted to get in. In horror, we both ran to the kitchen to grab something to defend ourselves with. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find, and we had a quick chat on whether or not we should go to the basement to get our mom. The knocking continues, and this time whoever it was wasn't knocking on the door anymore, but they had moved to the curtain-covered window next to the door to knock on it instead. My adrenaline kicked in, and I was feeling a little braver, so we decided to walk slowly towards the front door, and I decided to take a peek out of the window. I moved my curtain slightly to the side to take a look. However, I see nothing but darkness out there. I close the curtain and turn to my sister, when suddenly, that somebody tries to pull open the door aggressively. We both flinch, but thankfully, as I was the last person to enter the cabin that evening, the door is locked. At this point in time, it's just us, two kids with kitchen knives, and some strange person trying to get into our cabin in the middle of the night, and the only thing separating us is an old wooden door. At this point, we've had enough spooks, so my sister runs down to get my mom from the basement as I stand shakingly by the door holding a big-ass knife. I hear footsteps on the front porch, but no more knocking or attempts to open the door. My mom comes upstairs, and she seems to be in disbelief that anyone would be trying to get in at this hour. We all stay in the living room waiting for more sounds, but an hour passes by and we hear nothing. Until suddenly, we hear loud, panicked knocking on the door. We all jump at that second. We all jump at that sound, and my mom goes rapidly to the window to open the curtain and checks who it is. Suddenly, upon seeing who it is, she mutters, "What the?" and slowly opens the door. We hear her exchange a conversation with a woman whose voice is familiar. We walk over to check who it is and realize that it's our aunt, my mom's sister, who lives on the other side of the country, standing in our front porch in the middle of the night. She looks scared and panicked, and my mom keeps apologizing to her. No, you can't stay here. I'll order you a taxi so you can be somewhere safe," and closes the door. After some time, we see a taxi arrive and watch her leave with it. Our mom double-checks that the door is locked and comes over to us looking worried. We ask her about what happened, and she tells us that her sister had told her that there had been some dispute and that now she's being chased by a handful of dangerous and angry men that want to kill her and are trying to track her down. She's been trying to run and hide from them for 2 days straight now. She's always lived kind of on the wild side of life, but this was something new. The part of this story that really gives me chills is that the aunt claims she had just arrived at our front porch at that very moment when we all heard the panic knocking on the door. She certainly had not been standing there quietly for an hour or been knocking on the windows, meaning that whoever was the person faintly knocking on the door about an hour before her arrival wasn't her. We have no idea who it was or what their intentions were, but I know that given the extraordinary circumstances, I would reckon it was likely one of those men that was trying to track her. I still keep thinking back to that night. Whatever could have happened had that door not been locked.
This happened about 6 years ago. A couple friends and I have decided to go out into the woods and build a base camp. We brought axes, machetes, fuel, a tent. We went deep into the woods and spent all day cutting down trees to build a makeshift fence. Being idiots as it become dark, we realize we have no way to see. We start to realize that if we pour some fuel into a can, we can light the fumes at the top and create a torch. We made several torches, placing them in the surrounding woods. Now it got very dark. We needed more logs for the fire, so I was about 20 meters from our camp. I could hear my friends talking. I was swinging at the tree when I felt something hit my back. I froze and turned around and stared into the dark forest and right at the edge of the lights from our torches. I saw nothing though and assumed that something had fallen off the tree and hit my shoulders. Right as I'm about to swing, something hits me in the back of the head now. It hurt enough for me to make a grunt. I then see a rock at my feet. I'm very scared now. Turning back to walk towards the camp, I could hear my friends and see the light from the fire. I kept turning my head looking towards the darkness, and then about halfway, a rock flies next to me, missing my head by inches, and I mean a big rock too. I ran back to the camp and told everyone, and they have a look of terror in their faces. We sat for a while before more rocks come over, but we can't see or hear anyone. There's just rocks flying randomly into us. Needless to say, we didn't sleep. We just chilled in one tent holding our machetes, terrified, making sure the fire was big. I mean, there were so many rocks in the morning. That's what terrifies me. Literally hundreds of them. We were very deep in the woods and literally nobody was around us. I want to say a person did it, but I just don't see how somebody could have been out there completely invisible to us, not making any sound, and why they would have threw literally hundreds of them at us. It still terrifies me to this day.
Before I begin, I'm a 16-year-old male. About 3 years ago, I was in Virginia visiting family over the summer. We were right outside the DC area and staying in a 2-story house near the freeway. On the other side of the freeway was a forest. So, my mom, her boyfriend Eric, and I were all staying with Eric's parents. We had brought some night vision binoculars and decided that night was the perfect time to use them. So, after dinner, we gear up and head out. We pass under the freeway and head into the woods. When we get about 5 minutes into the forest, we sat down our bag and take out our binoculars. My mom looks around with them for a while, seeing a few squirrels here and there. She gets tired of them and passes them to me. I look around for a while, being careful not to look at the freeway for fear of being blinded. I spot something behind a tree about 50 feet to our left. I concentrate on it, trying to figure out what it is. It looked like a pale, bald, anorexic man looking straight at us from behind the tree. I get a bit uneasy, but I'm hesitant to believe it's really there. I ask Eric to take a look, just in case. To my despair, he sees it too. He describes it much the same way I did. Now, Eric is a former amateur boxer, and I train in MMA almost every day, but neither one of us wants to stick around with that thing. We start heading back to the house, crossing under the freeway. We take another look behind us as a car comes by. All three of us see glowing eyes light up the headlights on the other side of the freeway. We say fuck that and head back to the house. When we get back, Eric's parents are asleep and my mom and Eric go upstairs to the guest room. There's only one guest room, so I have the couch downstairs. I'm a little too excited after seeing that thing in the woods, so I end up staying up all night. Around 3 a.m., I'm watching TV and start hearing footsteps above me. I immediately remember our earlier encounter and panic a little. I try to calm down and tell myself it's just one of the dogs, or maybe someone who couldn't sleep. I keep hearing the footsteps for a while, until I hear a doorknob jiggle. I find it weird that they are trying to open a locked door, but try to ignore it. They stop, walk around for a few minutes, and then it's quiet again. I stay up until the sun starts coming up, and then pass out. My mom wakes me up, and I remember the footsteps from the night before. I describe what happened and ask if one of them got up at any time. She says no, and I think it must have been one of the dogs. That is, until she tells me the room above me is the office. No one was in the office, and the door stays locked at night. My heart sinks as I piece it all together. I don't know if it was that thing for sure, but I think it was. I've done a lot of research since then, trying to figure out what that thing was that night. I found two creatures that seemed to match it. I think it was either a skinwalker or a wendigo. Whichever one it was, I'm just thankful that door was locked. I know I wouldn't have been able to fight that thing, no matter how tough I am.
About 10 years ago, I was at a relative's house, a cottage in a small Michigan coastal town. For my summer vacations, she was almost completely deaf. Because of her impairment, she had a security system that flashed lights and called her home phone, in addition to a sound alarm. This is important for later. I had gone out to see the 4th of July carnival and arrived at home at 11. My relative went to sleep at 8 every night at the latest. When I came in, I turned off the alarm and turned it back on again, like I did every time I came home late. I poured myself a glass of water and went upstairs. Now upstairs, there was a long hallway. At the end of it was a door to a patio overlooking the backyard. We never used it because it wasn't up to code. The house was built in the late 1800s, and many aspects weren't worth the money it would cost to fix them. So there was a decorative antique chair that was propped against the door to the patio. When I walked in that night, the chair was propped against my bedroom door instead. I leaned underneath the doorknob, as if it was put there to try and keep someone from escaping. I bolted into my relative's room to find her fast asleep, her guard dog also asleep. I woke my relative up, and she put on her hearing aids. She called the alarm company, and they had no record of anything besides her setting the alarm at 6:30 and my entrance at 11. They called the police anyway. When the cops arrived, they moved the chair and attempted to open my bedroom door, but it's locked. The doorknob was original to the home and has no key for it, so the cops and I walked out to the front balcony and used my key to open the sliding door. and everything was as it should have been. And when we opened the door from the inside, it wasn't even locked. The cops searched the entire house and found nobody, and nothing was missing. I have no idea why there was a chair barricading my bedroom door, and why it appeared locked when the lock wasn't even turned. The police sent me for a fingerprint kit, and they found no fingerprints on the chair, not even my relatives, and no one knew why. I had trouble sleeping in the room after that. The police kept an undercover cop outside for a week since my relative was a beloved member of the community. Nothing fishy happened. A few other creepy things happened, but nothing compared to that. When I was young, my mum lived with me alone in our big house that she inherited. Now, when I was a lot younger than I could remember, my mum always told me that she'd get annoyed because I'd always play a game pretending I saw someone. I'd say that he come from the ceiling almost, and that he would speak to me. Apparently he was never threatening, but he would just like to talk to me temporarily, then leave. Being so young, she thought I just had an imaginary friend. But when things started to go missing around the house, she began to think otherwise. Well, it turns out that one day she had a friend of hers over who was also a cop, and he was telling her that they had reports of break-ins in the area. She thought it would be a good time to bring up what I'd been reporting, and apparently he gave her a cold stare and asked exactly where it had been coming from. She leads him to my bedroom and shows where the attic is, and he decides to go up, and what he finds shook my mum to her core, and she's never been the same since. Apparently, they found evidence that somebody had been living in there for months on end. And there had also been reports of a homeless man living in other buildings temporarily in our area. He had recently gone missing, and the time frame perfectly matched when I'd made my reportings. I'm just glad I'm too younger to really remember any of this. The thing that creeps all of us out the most is that he spoke to me. God knows what could have happened if he wasn't discovered sooner. Last year, my family went camping at the same park we go every year. Usually, we also get the same site, which is close to the bathroom and showers. However, this year we booked it late, and we were way out in the back of the park, which is a fairly secluded area surrounded by woods. It was a nice change, but a bit of a hassle. The first night we were there, my nephew woke up in the middle of the night, woke up my sister and told her that someone was outside the tent. She said something, then leaned up on the tent. He got scared and pushed back. She got outside and there's nothing to be seen. We just dismissed it as trash panda, even though my sister didn't think it was. The second night we had a few friends over. They brought their dog, who is the most well-behaved dog that I've ever met, with humans or other animals. So we're all sitting around the fire when the dog starts barking like crazy. Now this was a super rare occurrence, so the owner got up to see what's going on. When he took the leash off the table, she went crazy and pulled him towards the forest. Now she in fact pulled him a good 10 feet. He obviously wasn't expecting her to do that. She never acted in this way before. I decided to grab a flashlight and check out the forest in the direction she's pulling. There was nothing. She has seen squirrels, raccoons, cats, etc. and never acted in this way. Everyone took note of how odd that was, but again, we dismissed it as nothing. And it did spark up a conversation about the thing outside the tent from the previous night. The third and final nights we're there, we could see a storm coming in. The sky was lighting up, the thunder's loud, and the wind was crazy. We spent a good hour setting up traps, covering the chairs, etc., and everyone crawled into their tents for the night knowing that the storm was going to hit any second. I was the last to get in because I had to pee. I was there at the edge of the site, facing the forest, weeing towards the wind. The storm and forest was spooky enough, but what happened next will be forever burned in my memory. From deep within the forest, I heard the sound of a girl singing, not a fast-paced pop song, but that of a nursery rhyme. I can't make out words, but I was certain I was hearing the voice of a small girl. There were no other voices. I pushed that pee out as quick as I could. The second I finished, I bolted towards my tent and hear loud thunder overhead. My heart was pounding. I was sweaty and possibly a bit pee covered, but I didn't care. In the morning I told my family what happened, but not one of them believes me. One night at my family's cabin in West Virginia, my brother and I were sleeping on the porch. From the beds we're in, you could see the rocks at the top of the mountain. There appeared to be somebody on top of the mountain shining a light or a signal mirror down the valley that we're in, and it stops right on my brother and I. I could hear from all the way in our beds that somebody was on top of the mountains making a hoot or fake owl crawl. Meanwhile, on the gravel road leading up to the house, we can hear footsteps. We ran inside and our parents told us to sleep inside, but they didn't think anything of it. They thought we're just being kids. The next morning they asked us why we're walking around, and when we said we didn't go outside, they appeared very worried, saying they also heard footsteps. When I was 17, my neighbour's son tragically died from a drug overdose. He had just graduated high school the night before. I had seen the guy around but never really interacted with him. However, his dad and mine were the typical close/helpful neighbours, so I had developed a slight friendship with his dad. Anyway, a few weeks pass and his dad comes over with a box of his things he wanted to get rid of. They all belonged to his son. He said if I wanted the things and I said sure. It was pretty awkward, but I felt like he needed me to have them. In the box is a pair of light blue and white Jordans. Pretty old, but I figured I could use them. I later realised that something's written on the tongue. It's his initials. That gave me chills, not gonna lie. Now I'm not sure why it had taken until I realised that his son had written his initials on the shoes to weird me out wearing them, but it did. This isn't the creepiest part though. A few weeks go by and I'm home alone. I leave my room and head down the hallway towards the kitchen, and as soon as I round the corner, I make out a white figure about 15 feet ahead of me. It felt so strange because I didn't feel fear, more like a weird safe feeling. It took me a few seconds, but I realised that it's him, and as soon as I notice, he suddenly vanishes. I hit the lights as quick as I can and sprinted out of there though. But it always felt like he was over watching me, taking care of me. I've lived in 11 different houses in my lifetime, but only had one spooky experience in one of them. My husband and I were watching TV. Teenage daughter was out with friends. There was an open doorway to a passage leading to the bedrooms right in front of us, and I see a full-bodied apparition pass in front of us. Thinking it's our daughter, I don't think anything of it, but I get up to check and speak to her, and there's no one there. I told my husband, who had also seen the figure, but He thought the same thing, and we never saw it again. I wouldn't be posting it here if only I saw it, but the fact that my husband also saw it and we both stopped talking is what freaks the hell out of me.